Welcome to Theology Pub, the monthly event sponsored by Missio Dei Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. Theology Pub is designed to engage the culture by dialoguing with people in the public square. The event is held the first Wednesday of every month at Mulligan's Pub on College and Drake, from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., and all are welcome. For more information on Theology Pub, log on to facebook.com/theopub and become a fan. Tonight we will be discussing the topic, can a Christian smoke pot?
Anyway, let's get started. Just to start, kind of my opinion on this issue is that God created all things good. We know that. The Bible says that He created all things good. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that the creation of marijuana was a good thing. Drugs in general were a good thing. But we fell as humans. And in our sinful state, there are certain rules and guidelines that have been put in place by God because of being sinful. So because of that, it's a possibility that marijuana is one of those things that we no longer have the liberty to do as Christians. I don't know. That's what we're here to discuss. But I think that it's important to start by trying to figure out what was the good intended purpose for creating something like marijuana. Certainly we see opiates, right? We see heroin in its raw form. We see it as, Vicodin in a much more watered down synthetic form, and we say, okay, well that was created to help us with our pain. Does marijuana fit within that role? Those are questions that we need to be answered. Does anybody have any question or opinion that they'd like to ask, or do they want me to just start rolling through some questions to get things started? Is there air conditioning? Good question. Yeah, usually we're working on yes, yeah, maybe we could shut the fire down before we burst into flames. So let me ask you this. Is there a difference between recreational and medical use? And is there really a difference between the two? What is it? You spoke up. I'm so proud of you.
I believe that God put a plan on this earth to cure every human disease and gave us the intelligence to do that. But I also believe that on the, you said the dark side of things, that even good abuse. So recreational use, from the standpoint of that use, no, recreational use, I think if it alters you to a point where you're harmful to others, it's not okay. If it's used for medical purposes, to relieve yourself of pain or to cure your illness, I'm on board.
But at the same time, would you really say that recreational use and abuse are the same things? Because it seems like there's kind of an equation here. How is recreational use of, say, alcohol that much different than recreational use of marijuana?
Anybody want to answer that question?
I think with alcohol, the Bible says it's okay to drink, just not drunkenness. Drunkenness is not okay. So when it comes to anything that God talks about in the Bible, it's always, whether it's food or whatever, it's always moderation. So I think there's a big difference between somebody who's taking hits a few times a day to relieve pain, nausea, neuropathy, whatever, and someone who gets up in the morning and parks their butt on the couch and smokes hot all day long for the entire day. I think that would border on abuse. Sorry.
No, it's all right. No.
Am I supposed to say but?
No, it's not. But oh gosh, that was the worst.
I hate him as if he does that.
That'll be on video. Well, I think there are a few questions that were brought up there. Number one, is there anything wrong with Christians acting recreationally, whether substance like alcohol versus marijuana. And the other issue that was brought up is this concept of drunkenness. What is that? That's a very subjective term. And other than being led by the Spirit as a Christian, in your conscience, how can we objectify that term, drunkenness, or sober-mindedness, or many of the terms that are used in the New Testament when describing somebody's state? Gary. I mean, I know you have some input at least on the concept of being sober-minded, but I don't know.
Yeah, it just seemed like with sober-mindedness, I mean, there's some pretty clear admonitions to be sober-minded. Admittedly, those are directed toward qualifications for ministers. I'm under the persuasion that what ministers are called to is not necessarily different. They're just called to be walk for walk. But sober-mindedness tends to, if you look at some other first century writers, Jewish writers, talking about sober-mindedness is when you no longer have the ability to use reason and mental soundness to control your actions, emotions, passions, and you cease to be sober-minded. So I think that's a good question that I'm unaware of, that perhaps people have more familiarity with the use of marijuana could shed light on, is, how is it possible, or is it possible to use marijuana recreationally and maintain a sense of sober-mindedness or a sense of control, the ability to make sound, rational decisions?
Right. Yeah, anyone that would chime in on that?
Can you, just like alcohol, right? We're all having, not all of us, but most of us are having beer, not necessarily going to leave here drunk. Can you do that with marijuana? I've never used it, I don't know.
Yes, because I do this a lot.
And as a former user, I would probably agree with you on that. And we kind of had this conversation before, that in my mind, again, very subjective, unfortunately, is that the line that's crossed is, at what point am I not rational enough to know that I'm committing an objective moral crime, cheating on my wife, not loving God, the things that are specifically and explicitly spelled out in the Bible. Now, I can tell you from using marijuana that I didn't ever cheat on my wife. I don't have a conviction to use it anymore. But
I think one point needs to be made that the comparison of marijuana to alcohol tends to break down very quickly. While there is some, one of the problems, and maybe there is something of an analogy relative to, we do know that there's hard liquor versus beer, but there are two major strains of marijuana, both having substantially different effects, and so the discussion becomes, we might say, complex fairly quickly when we're talking about marijuana, because it's not all the same. There's indica and there's sativa, and they both have different types of effects. So that complicates the discussion fairly quickly.
do you think there's that would take, that one would keep you sober-minded and then the other would not?